So we're going to do a right unilateral flexion. So our standing flexion test is going to be positive on the right. Our deep sulcus is going to be deep on the right. Our posterior ILA is going to be also on the right. And our sphinx and spring is going to be negative because when you push on the base of the sacrum, it's going to move forward.
Okay, so Abby and I are going to go over both the hand motions and what each of the dysfunctions would look like drawn out. So we're going to start with our unilateral flexions and extensions. And so for this one, we have, as you can see, Abby has beautifully drawn here, that we have a deep sulcus and posterior ILA both on the right. So remember, when they're on the same side, that's when we know to go in with two hands. And so when we go in with our two hands, we're just going to make our hands look like our findings. So we're going to make this top part, which represents our sacral base, go deep on the right to match this guy, which then makes my ILA on the right go posterior and inferior, or closer to me. And so then from there, we know to name it for the side of the positive seated flexion test. And this one's positive on the right, so we'll name it for the right hand. And so we call this our right unilateral flexion, because that right hand is flexing forward.
So now we're going to do a left unilateral flexion. Going to look very similar to our right unilateral flexion, but everything is now going to be on the left side. So for our standing flexion test, it's going to be positive on the left. I'm going to draw my plus sign. For my deep sulcus, I'm going to find that it's deep on the left. For my posterior ILA, we're going to find that it's posterior on the left. And for my sphinx and spring test, it's still going to be negative because you're going to be able to push the base forward on those tests. And then I didn't do this for the right one, but it's a unilateral because that's a really bad straight line. But our deep and our posterior are on the same side. So if your D and P are on the same side, your line's going to go straight down the middle, and that's how you also know it's unilateral.
Okay, so now doing our left unilateral flexion. Again, we see that our deep sulcus and our posterior inferior ILA are on the same side, so we know to go in with two hands, and then we just make our hands match our findings. And so we want to make the deep sulcus, or the left side of the base, move forward, and then that makes our left side of our apex, or our ILA, go posterior inferior, and then we name it for the side of the positive seated flexion test. And so this one we would call our left unilateral flexion, because that left side is flexing forward.
Okay, so now we're going to do a right unilateral extension. So our standing flexion test is going to be positive on the right. And our findings are going to look similar to a flexion, but our deep and posterior sulcus are going to be on the different side. So for a right unilateral extension, my deep sulcus is going to be on the left. And my posterior ILA is also going to be on the left. Now my sphinx and my spring, that's going to be positive because when I push on this base, it's not going to go forward. It's going to stay back because it's an extension. And so, and my D and my P are on the same side, so I'm going to try to draw a straight line this time. It's a little bit better. So I've got to name it for my positive side, which is on the right. So if this is deep, that means this is shallow. If this is posterior, that means this is anterior. So that means that it's extended on the right. Again, naming it for the side that's positive. Don't get confused and name it for where you find your deep and posterior.
Okay, now we're moving to our extensions. And so for this one, we have our deep sulcus, posterior, inferior, ILA still on the same side. So we're going in with two hands. So we have our two hands, and then we're going to make our findings match on our hands. We want to make the left sulcus move deep, and that makes our left posterior inferior ILA. and then we name it for the side of our positive seated flexion test. So for this one, our seated flexion test is positive on the right, so we'll name it for the right hand. And you can see that the right hand is extended back, and so this is our right unilateral extension.
So now we're going to do a left unilateral extension. So my standing flexion test is going to be positive on the left. My deep sulcus is going to be on the right. My posterior ILA is also going to be on the right. So because my D and my P are on the same side, my line is going to go straight down the middle. It means it's an unilateral. So if I'm naming it based on my positive side, if that side's deep, this side is shallow. That's supposed to be an S. And if that side's posterior, this side is anterior, and that's what makes it an extension. Now my sphinx and my spring is still going to be positive because when I push on my base, it's not going to go forward.
Okay, so now our left unilateral extension. Here we again have our deep sulcus and our posterior inferior ILA are both on the right. Since those are on the same side, we go in with two hands. And so then we make our hands match our findings. We want to make the sulcus, or the top of our hand, go deep on the right, which then makes our ILA on the right go posterior inferior. And then we just name it for the side that's positive on our seated flexion test. So we're positive on the left, we'll name it for the left. And here we can see we have left unilateral extension because the base of the left hand is moving back towards you, moving posterior, so it's an extension.
So now we're going to do a bilateral extension. Now this one, for your standing flexion test, it's going to be a false negative because you're going to feel them move at the same time in the same direction. So this is going to be a false negative. My deep sulcus, we're not actually going to have one because if I'm extended, my whole sacrum is extended. So these are both going to be shallow. So you're not going to have a deep sulcus. Posterior ILA, you're also not going to have a posterior ILA because if the whole sacrum's extended, these 2 points are going to be pushed forward. So these are going to be anterior. And my sphinx and my spring is going to be positive because when I push on the base, I'm not going to be able to push it forward.
Okay, so if we have a standing flexion test that does not give us one of our fingers moving first or furthest, then that means that we have either a negative standing flexion test, meaning that the sacrum is perfectly where it should be, there's no dysfunction, or we have a false negative standing flexion test, which is what we're going to be looking at for our bilateral flexions and extensions. So for this one, as you can see, Abby put, this is our false negative. That means that both of our PSISs during the seated flexion test are moving, but they're moving the same amount and at the same time. And so it feels like they're not moving, like it's negative. And so with that, we know we're going to have something that's bilateral. And then we want to check, we can check two ways. We can check by springing on the base, springing on the apex, and seeing if it likes to move into flexion more or into extension more. And then with that, for this one, our bilateral extension, when we press on the base, aka our spring test, we are going to have resistance. And so that's how we know that these are both shallow. And so when we have our negative or false negative seated flexion test, we're going to again go with our two hands, but they're going to move as a unit this time. And so we make them match our findings. These are both shallow or they're posterior. And so that we can see is a bilateral extension. And when we make those go shallow, it makes both of our ILAs go anterior or deep. And so then that matches with our bilateral extension.
Okay, so now we're going to do a bilateral flexion. Now our standing flexion test is going to look the same as it did for a bilateral extension. It's going to be a false negative, meaning that they're going to move at the same time and move together. Our deep sulcus is going to be deep on both sides because our whole sacrum is tilted forward, flexed forward, flexed forward. I always would get those confused, but if you know when your sacrum is forward, it's flexion. So deep sulcus is both sides, right and left. Posterior ILA is also both sides, right and left. Because if our sacral base is forward, our ILAs are then tilted back bilaterally. Now our sphinx and our spring is going to be negative because when I push on the base, it's going to move forward.
Okay, so for our bilateral flexion, just like for our bilateral extension, we have our false negative seated flexion test. And so for that one, we're moving the same amount, same time when we do the seated flexion test, and that automatically clues us off that it's bilateral. And so we're still going to go in with 2 hands, but this time our hands are going to move as a unit instead of like a broken in half sacrum. And so then we just have it match our findings. And so for this one, we're deep on both sides. And so that makes our entire sacrum flex forward. And again, if we want to test this to make sure that it's deep, we can add spring to the base and it'll go further into flexion. But if we add spring to the apex, it will not come back into extension. So that's how we can confirm that it's flexed. And then when we add that spring to the base, it goes easily, which gives us our negative sphinx spring. So that is our bilateral flexion.
So now we're going to get into our torsions. First, we're going to do a right on right torsion. Our standing flexion test is going to be positive on the left. Our deep sulcus is going to be also on the left. Our posterior ILA is going to be on the right. And we'll do this in a second, but if my D's and my P's are on opposite sides, I know that I'm getting into torsions. When they're on the same side, our line was straight down, it was unilateral. When they're opposite sides, that's when you know your line is going to go straight diagonal through your sacrum like this. So we're naming it for the positive side. If my sacrum is tilted deep forward, pushing forward, what I'm doing with my sacrum is looking to the right. If I had eyes right here, my sacrum is looking to the right, so that's why I know we're looking right. On what axis? This is going through the right side of the sacrum, so that's why it's looking on axis. Looking on what axis? So my sacrum is looking right on my right axis. Now my sphinx and my spring is going to be negative because when I push here, it's going to move forward.
So now we're working with our torsions, and we know we're going to have a torsion if our deep sulcus and our posterior inferior ILA are on opposite sides, as you can see here. And so whenever we know they're on opposite sides, then we're going to be going in with one hand, and we determine which hand based on the seated flexion test. So for our right on right torsion, our seated flexion test is positive on the left. So we go in with the left hand. We've got our index finger representing our oblique axis, and this guy is pointing to the right. So we're on the right oblique axis. And then we insert our findings into our hand. So we need our deep sulcus to be on the left. Remember, our sulcus is the top of our hand at the sacral base. And so we make the left side of the top of our hand go deep. And then we imagine we have little eyes on our palm. And then our palm is looking to the right on the right axis. And so this is our right on right torsion.
Okay, so now we're going to do a left on left torsion. My standing flexion test is going to be positive on the right. My deep sulcus is going to be deep on the right. My posterior ILA, because we're dealing with a torsion, it's going to be on the opposite side, so it's going to be on the left. Because my D and my P are on opposite sides, I know I'm working with a torsion, and my line is going to go through the left oblique axis. So if I'm deep, I'm moving my sacrum forward, and I'm looking to the left. That's why it's looking left on a left oblique axis, And because when I go to do my sphinx and my spring, because this is deep, it's flexing forward, I'm going to get a negative sphinx and spring because I'm going to be able to push it forward.
So for our left on left torsion, again, we have our deep sulcus and our posterior ILA on opposite sides. That automatically tells us that it's a torsion, so we need to go in with one hand. And then we look at our seated flexion test, which is positive on the right, so we know we're going to use our right hand. So we go in, we have our index finger pointing out, and this guy represents our left oblique axis because the index finger is pointing to the left. And then we just make our findings go into our hand. And so we want to make our sulcus deep on the right. So we take the right base of our hand sacrum, make it go deep, which then makes us come posterior inferior on the left. And then we use the little fake eyeballs on our palm. They are looking left on a left oblique axis. So this is our left on left torsion.
Okay, so now we're going to get into our backwards torsions. We just did our forward torsions, now we're going to do our backwards. So we're going to first do a right on left. So our standing flexion test is going to be positive on the right. Our deep sulcus is going to be on the left. Posterior ILA is going to be on the right. Now, for our forward torsions, when our D's and our P's are on opposite sides, our oblique axis was opposite of that. But for our backwards torsions, our axis is going to go straight through our D and our P. And also, just a good rule of thumb, your axis is always opposite side of your positive standing flexion, seated flexion test, excuse me. It's always opposite. If you forget to know, like it goes through the D's and P's, just know it's opposite of your positive seated flexion test. Okay, so if this is deep and this is posterior, I know that this one has to be shallow and this one has to be anterior. So if we're looking at our positive side, our sacrum is tilted back. So when I go to push on it, it's not going to move forward, making our sphinx and our spring positive. And our ILA on this side is pushing forward. So that's why when we look at our sacrum, I'm tilting this way. My eyes are to the right. I'm looking right on a left oblique axis.
Now for our backwards torsions, just like with any torsion, we have our deep sulcus and our posterior inferior ILA on opposite sides. That's how we know it's a torsion, and we know to go in with one hand. When we're going in with one hand, we choose that hand based on which seated flexion test is positive. So for our right on left torsion, we are positive on the right, so we're going in with the right hand, and then we just want to make our findings match onto our hand. So we want to make our deep sulcus on the left, so we want this left side to go deep. And remember, for our backwards torsions, these are the ones that are uncomfy for the wrist. So whenever I make that left side go deep, that's uncomfy for the wrist, makes my ILA on the right side go posterior inferior, and we know that the eyeballs on our palm are looking to the right on our left axis. So this is our right on left torsion.
Okay, so this is our last sacral dysfunction, and it is our last backwards torsion. So we're going to do a left on right torsion. Again, this is a backwards torsion. My standing flexion test is going to be positive on the left. My deep sulcus is going to be on the right. My posterior ILA is going to be on the left. And because my D and my P are on opposite sides, I know that we're working with a torsion. Now, my positive seated flexion test is on the left, so my axis is always opposite of that. So my oblique axis is going through the right. Now, that makes, if this is deep, this is shallow, this is posterior, this is anterior. So what the front of my sacrum is doing is it's tilting backwards because it's shallow. I'm able to feel it, then I'm able to not be able to push that one forward. It's tilting back, and my eyes are looking to the left, So I'm looking left on a right oblique axis. So if, again, this is shallow, that means I can't push it forward, so that means it's a positive sphinx in spring.
Okay, so for our last torsion, our left on right, again, we're going in with our deep sulcus and our posterior inferior ILA are on opposite sides, so we know we're using one hand, and then we use the hand of the positive seated flexion test. So we're going in with our left hand for this one. We have our finger pointing to the right, which means we know we're on the right axis, and then we make our hand match our findings. So we want to make our deep sulcus on the right, so we take this right sacral base, push it forward to make it deep, which gives us posterior inferior on the left. And then we use our little eyeballs. They're looking to the left. So we are left on a right oblique axis. This is our left on right torsion.